Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Mr. Eric Holder, former U.S. Attorney General.
Hello. Please rise. Please give this brother a standing ovation. Please get to your feet. The first black attorney general in the United States of America.
Thank you.
All right. This brother is something very special from God. Very special. Thank you. Hello.
Hey, y'all.
Eric and I have done this many times before in the past because we both worked in Washington, D.C., as you know, and still do. And I am just so grateful. I'm on a scooter, I'm on a walker, I'm on crutches. I don't know what I tore in my knee, but whatever it is, this leg has refused to work over the last 72 hours. However, if I had to be here on a gurney, I was coming here tonight. Okay, all right. I was not gonna miss this. I have never, ever had a conversation, whether on the air, off the air, you know, at an affair, where I did not learn something from this brother. This brother is not only one of the most brilliant minds in the world of law, but also one of the most insightful, compassionate, and caring human beings that God has blessed us to have on this planet.
Thank you.
I mean that quite respectfully and quite sincerely.
Well, you know, after that, I'm willing to, like, end it here.
That would be smart.
It can't go any place but down.
Because he also knows that even with my dear friends, I ask what God puts on my heart to ask.
Uh-oh.
And I'm often told, well, I was thinking that, but I didn't think anybody would actually ask that or say that. So this evening, I don't do interviews, I do conversations. So my first question is, when I heard you were doing a book, I assumed it was going to be a memoir. However, my goodness, it's a history lesson. The story of voting, I don't know if I slept during civics class. I know I never liked American history, so I never got good grades in it. But the first part of your book is a teaching journal. And then how you so gracefully were weaving in biographical information made it entertaining as well as educational. It's brilliant. This is your first book.
It's my first book. I still have a memoir that I'm working on.
Okay.
And the
big book deal.
The memoir is like 5 years late. And so the publishers...
They cut the advance if you don't get the book in on time.
Well, you know, and the publisher said, well, you know, how about doing a book on voting, about the state of our democracy, given where the nation is right now? And so I, over the course of, I guess maybe 10, 12 months, wrote this book. I've got to get back to the memoir, which hopefully will get done sometime next year.
So, if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Unsolicited Advice, because as you well know, having heard my radio show, I'm not short on giving out advice. I think that the first part of your book should be made into a pamphlet and given to every school child in America. Because I learned about voting and the history of voting. I did 5 years on the Federal Reserve's Business Advisory Committee. And I have to admit that one of the most frustrating things is I didn't really understand the Federal Reserve, even after 5 years. We tell people vote, but they don't really understand. They don't know the history. Have you given consideration to the first chapter of your book, the first part of your book, it's divided into parts, actually being a teaching pamphlet that we could provide to, I'm sure a lot of adults need a refresher course in how voting works in America?
It's interesting you say that, because when we were in the process of writing the book, developing the idea for the book, that was actually, a lot of thought was given to that, to somehow make this something that would be accessible not only to adults, but to younger people.
Absolutely.
As well. Because the history part, which sets up everything in part one, you know, people hear history and go, I don't want to.
You don't remember that stuff.
Right, but this is a look at history that is not commonly taught, but is extremely important. this notion that somehow voting rights is something that only black folks fought for in the 1960s is inconsistent with what our history really is. I mean, the first people, as I say in the book, as we talk about it, first people to fight for voting rights were white men who
That's right.
didn't have property.
That's right.
They were the
Who
first
were
one-
not the elite.
Exactly. They said, well, wait a minute. Hey, how come, my friend down here, other white guy who's got some property, he gets to vote, I don't. So they fought for the right to vote, and there was even opposition to that. Some of the founding fathers said, well, wait a minute, if you give the right to vote to white men without property, they don't have the intellectual capability to cast a vote in an appropriate way. And if they don't have property, they'll be able to be bribed, and their votes can be bought. And one founding father said, if you give the vote to white men without property, watch, women are going to ask for the right to vote. He said, women will ask for the right.
And then colored people.
And exactly. And they said, black people will start asking for the right to vote. How ridiculous would that be? So that's part of the history. And so we talk about that fight for white men without property, women, African Americans. That's the history of the right to vote. And so the struggle for the right to vote is something that this nation has been dealing with since its inception.
So even though we certainly, the PR for America, we're the great democracy, we really have not been a great democracy if we refuse to allow individuals to vote since the very beginning of this country.
Right. There are lots of systems that are put in place, the Electoral College, for instance, to try to make sure that, or to minimize the impact that we, regular people have on the direction of the nation, which is inconsistent with who we say we are, both
Absolutely.
as a democracy and inconsistent
Absolutely.
with the nation that we said we were forming back when we fought that successful Revolutionary War. And the struggle to really get this nation to be a democracy is in some ways a continuing theme, and it is really, I think, in a lot of ways, a descriptor of what this nation has always been about. And we see it today. This is all about power. It's always power at the end of the day is what this is all about. The acquisition of power, the retention of power, and keeping power away from certain groups of people. And we see it today.
So, Eric, does that mean that America is better at public relations and image creating than we are truth? Because we fight wars to force countries to be democratic, to allow people, we sacrifice our youth, send them to war to insist on fair voting in other countries, and yet we don't have it in America.
No. It's a good point in the sense that if you remember those pictures, Afghanistan, Iraq, we sent our best and brightest, young men, young women to fight wars so that people in Afghanistan, Iraq would have the ability to choose their own leaders. You remember the pictures of people that had purple on their fingers to show that they had voted?
That's right, they had voted.
Right, and so some of those same soldiers would come back to the United States, and if you were an African American in Texas, your ability to vote was probably more difficult than it was for an Iraqi or an Afghani who you had fought to give that right to vote. So yeah, ours is still an imperfect nation. We've never lived quite up to our founding ideals, but the book is also about people who, in spite of the fact that the odds seem to be always against them, fought to make this nation better, to try to make this nation live up to its founding ideals, and hopefully will serve as inspiration for us in our time to make sure that we do what we can. We owe a debt to those people who sacrificed, who committed themselves, some of whom gave their lives, so that you'd have an African-American Attorney General, an African-American President, people having the right to vote. And if we don't fight for that right to vote now, we are doing a great disservice. We're not honoring their memory.
I want to ask, how many of you, please, raise your hands, how many of you have read the book?
Whoa.
Not good. All right. Now, I know my people, and some of you, about halfway through this interview, are going to check your emails and going to check your text messages. So right now, pull out your device, go to Amazon, and get this book. This book, okay, do it now. Do not wait. We got a book right here in the front row. Thank you. All right, do it now. Normally, they say plug the book at the end. I'm going to plug it throughout this entire hour with you all because this is something you all need to read. Eric, I pray that that first part one, is turned into a pamphlet. All right, it is really, really needed because the reality is, you talk about we got to vote. We can change the system if we vote. Basically, the voters are over a certain age, a certain demographic in this country. Young people are disillusioned. Usually an event is what triggers people to vote. I don't know that George Floyd had a lasting effect. It triggered demonstrations, it triggered a commitment, but these midterm elections were as dismal as ever, low turnout. So how, if you really don't understand, and that's what your part one does, is help you really understand why you need to vote and why you should vote. How do you encourage young people? How do you ignite the fire in them?
Yeah, I mean, the point you make is a good one. The largest voting bloc in the country right now is young people. They far outnumber my generation, baby boomers. And yet baby boomers have a disproportionate amount of power because we vote in substantially greater numbers, and proportion-wise. And so my hope would be that, you know, the murder of George Floyd will be not a moment, but will lead to a movement. That the Supreme Court's recent decision with regard to reproductive rights, abortion, will not be something that ignites people for a day, but gets people to the polls in November. The Supreme Court decision when it came to the climate. Again, you know, young people, this is a world in which young people will live, you know, for many,
but
many
how
decades.
do you ignite them is what is, I think, puzzling to the majority of us over a certain age. Yeah. How do you really get them excited and make them believe that they really can change this system? Because that's what I hear. You know, my favorite, I have a lot of formats. God has blessed me with a lot of ways of touching. 92% of all Black Americans now touch one branch of my company or another. But thank you, God has been very good. But what I hear from my talk stations, which I'm very partial to because I like to talk, is that, you know, it doesn't do any good to vote. Nothing's going to change. Something's got to ignite them, and I just assume that George Floyd being murdered for 9.5 minutes before our very eyes would have been a permanent fire. But it hasn't been, and I mean, then the kid who shot the demonstrators and got away with it, and okay, I mean, these type of incidents in our generation would have made us buck wild crazy. We never would have stopped demonstrating. We would have shut things down. We would have forced change. But young people went to some demonstrations and then they went back home and got occupied with what was the hottest thing streaming or what was the latest fashion, because media, particularly social media, has taken the emphasis off social activism and placed it on commercial consumption. They're more concerned about if, in fact, they fit in with a certain look or a certain trend or a certain style, then they're concerned about. I hear young people call my talk station saying, who cares who's on the Supreme Court? And I mean, it drives me crazy. I'm like, you don't understand that they're determining how you're going to live your life, and they don't understand.
Well, you see, now I'm doing something that's really risky. I'm going to disagree with Cathy on this one.
Okay.
Because I think that young people too often are characterized in that way. And yet we see, I think, the involvement of young people, not in maybe the numbers that they're capable of being, but I think we see civic engagement, political activism, by
Oh,
young
yes.
people.
Now, I'm not trying to indict the whole population.
No, and we talk about in I guess in part 3 of the book, or part 1, still part 1, a couple of young people, a guy named Chris Hollins.
Yes.
Young man.
Absolutely, yes. Give that brother a round of applause. Remarkable.
Young man in Texas that, they're trying to decide who's going to actually run the 2020 elections in Texas.
And he sacrificed everything.
Right. Nobody wants to do it. He's supposed to pick somebody, and he says, all right, I'll do it myself.
Absolutely.
And so he comes up.
And sacrificed millions of dollars he could have made personally in order to help.
Right. And so he comes up with, drop boxes, 24/7 voting, a whole range of things. Increases the turnout in Harris County in Texas to a greater degree than ever. Record numbers of people vote because of that young person's involvement. Talk about another woman, Love Caesar.
Yes.
North Carolina A&T.
Yes.
She realizes,
Yes.
there we go. She realizes that A&T is gerrymandered. That if you live on that side of the campus, you vote in a congressional district.
One dorm could vote in one district and the other dorm had to vote in another. That's
exactly.
Right.
And she drew a line, literally took a piece of chalk and drew a line down the middle of A&T to energize people at the campus and make them understand that they were their power was being diluted. We heard about that at the NDRC, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, that I'm the chairman of, filed a lawsuit, worked with them, and actually had them change that voting district, which meant that all of the voting districts in North Carolina had to be changed and had to be made more fair. So there are young people who are engaged, young people who are active, but I still don't think that they understand the power that they have and have not exercised that power to the degree that they're capable of doing. My hope would be that, Supreme Court decisions, the attacks on our democracy by Republicans, by Trump, will energize people, not only young people, but everybody, to understand that this election especially, these midterms especially, matter maybe more than any other midterms have ever mattered. Our democracy is under attack.
Absolutely.
And so we've got to vote. We've got to vote, but we got to do more than that. It's not only about voting. That to me is that's the baseline. I mean, if you're not voting, people say, my vote doesn't matter. Really? If your vote doesn't matter, why the hell do you think they're trying so hard to take it away from you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that was a setup question for you, and I'm glad you disagree, because I want to ask you some things that aren't covered in the book. For instance, C-SPAN, government funded, covers hearings. How do we redirect C-SPAN to tell these messages, to spotlight these individuals that are making a difference? Explain voting. I mean, just doing a presentation on C-SPAN of your first part of your book would be better than even handing out pamphlets. So how do we use our tax dollars to really help inform individuals? Because if we do what you did in your book, the way you were able to weave in emotion, I was on the bridge with you. I was at the cemetery with you. I felt your heart when you were talking about how those events in your personal life touched you not only professionally, but really touched you as a man, having watched it on television as a teenager. I was there with you. The power of television, the power of media, and particularly social media, is that it's not used to educate. It's only used to entertain. There is an educational component that takes place in media, be it social or traditional, but there's no one really focused on using it as a teaching tool. I have an employee who left me to go get a PhD who used to manage a television station for Clark Atlanta, and her PhD is going to focus on how to use entertainment as an educational vehicle. But we have C-SPAN, we have other devices that are paid for with government money. Your point about the Supreme Court being changed, shorter terms, more members. If that were explained on a network like C-SPAN, I think young people, as well as those of us who need to also know that, would be better equipped to do what you suggest should be done to change the American system?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of places, a variety of ways in which we as individuals can acquire knowledge. Now, I look at, I do Twitter, I look at Instagram, and, this TikTok every now and again, whatever. And so there is entertainment, and that's fine. But I think I have a nice mix of, being amused by things, getting pissed off by seeing things, and being informed, as well. And so I think we as individuals have a responsibility to try to use social media in an appropriate way and understand that it is not merely for entertainment, that there's informational stuff there, there's political stuff, there's civic engagement stuff there that we can use. And yeah, the idea of having, C-SPAN, maybe focus on issues. I mean, we have the public broadcasting system that does
There's another example.
whole bunch of things that I think people too often don't watch. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, if you look at the American Experience on PBS, it talks about a whole range of American history issues that give you a sense of not only, what happened in the past, but why we are the way we are now and how it's connected to the past. So there's a variety of ways in which I think we can get to information. And I think, as I said, social media can be fun, and it should be, but it also ought to be used so that we inform ourselves.
So you tell us there's certain things you think we need to do. One of them is change the Supreme Court. That people, and I think probably most Americans agree, you don't leave somebody in a job until they die. All right, okay? And particularly when you don't do a good job. And we've got a situation, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I know you can't, but Clarence Thomas needs to be fired. His wife, he crossed the line. All right, his wife, is a definite treasonous individual influencing a Supreme Court justice. Now, if she worked in any company in America, he would be fired or she would be gone, okay? But how do you change the Supreme Court? Okay, the old saying, it'll take an act of Congress. What does it take to actually change the Supreme Court?
It's interesting. People think that the Supreme Court can only be changed by constitutional amendment, and that's not necessarily true. You can, for instance, just by passing a statute, Congress can change the number of people who we have on the Supreme Court. I think that we need to expand the court because 2 seats were stolen.
Oh, no question. Absolutely stolen.
The fact that Merrick Garland, who's now doing a good job as Attorney General, was denied a Supreme Court seat because, according to Mitch McConnell,
too close to the election.
Too close to the election. All right. And then it was like 10, 11 months before. And then he puts Amy Coney Barrett on the court
during the election
while people are voting.
Right.
So those are I believe, two stolen seats. And so the court needs to be expanded. I think the court also, we need to have term limits for the court.
Absolutely.
And the interesting thing there is this is one where John Roberts and I agree. Chief Justice Roberts says in a speech, 15 years. I say it ought to be 18 years. But when we started off as a nation, Supreme Court justices didn't live as long, and they left the court when they died. And we wanted to have...
People didn't live as long.
People didn't live as long.
Exactly.
And now we have people living substantially longer, people on the Supreme Court serving 30, 40 years, and then timing their retirements so that they retire when a president who is of like ideological mind has the ability to pick who their replacement should be. So my solution to that is to say, all right, you serve 18 years, and a president would appoint a Supreme Court justice in his or her first year and his or her third year in a term. So you get two per term. If you're a two-term president, you appoint 4 people. And if you do 18 years, over time, you would get back to 9 members of the Supreme Court. But if you do that in 18 years, that would, it would take the confirmation process, make it, I think, a lot less contentious, and also come up with a way in which we have new people getting on the court with new ideas. I mean, Clarence Thomas, other people, they've been on the court 30 years. He's I think, he's the longest serving justice at this point, and there's a whole bunch of other issues that I have with him.
Isn't that sad?
Well,
He's the senior member of the Supreme Court. That's shameful.
But to have any one individual in this country with that much power
That's
for
right.
that long
Listening to Virginia.
Well, in an unelected position, that's, I think, another anti-democratic measure that we need to
Absolutely, absolutely. But why is it that the only time that we have total bipartisan cooperation is when there's a threat of there being a third party, an independent party? The Republicans and the Democrats get it together, get on the same page, in lockstep, when there's a threat of another party.
Well, again, it's all about power. Nobody wants to give up power. And we have a two-party system they're invested in having a two-party system. I think the possibility for a third party is potentially there, but it would involve, I think, a charismatic figure to lead the party. You'd need substantial.
Could that not have been Jesse Jackson?
Well,
could Jesse Jackson not have started a third party? What do you all think? You think? Okay, wait a minute. Can the yeses raise their hands and the noes raise their hands? Okay, noes? No. You don't think? What do you think, Eric? You don't think that when Jesse was at the height of his political career that he could have started?
No, I mean...
Uh-oh, there's a hell no out there. That calls for 2 votes.
I think that we need to get real, all right?
You think we need to do what?
No, and get real in this sense. Would America support a third party led by a black man at that time? I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. As charismatic as he was, as capable as he was and is, that I don't think is a
You don't think that that's the closest we came as a black community?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be realistic, back then. Now, it had, it's hard to see how a third party breaks through the structure that we now have, and especially the way in which the parties are dividing. The Republican Party, as I say in the book, just ain't that into democracy right now, and them moving in an authoritarian way, Democrats moving, I think, moving in more towards a progressive side. It's in fits and starts, but I think...
I love it when you say Democrats are about hope, perceived as hope, and Republicans use fear.
Yeah.
That's the description of the two. You all order the book, okay? I'm telling you, okay? A reminder, go to Amazon.com. This book is very, very, very eye-opening.
Well, yeah, Democrats, we tend to run on hope. Republicans tend to run on fear.
Law and order.
Law and order, and it's not only law and order. It's a question of, we need law and order to protect you from those people, whoever those people are, however those people are defined. What we as Democrats need to do is inject a little bit of fear into our campaigning.
Absolutely. Our narrative is weak on the Democratic side.
Because the reality is, it's not only about hope and making the nation better, and that's what we should be. That's what we should be about. It also should be about the fear that Americans should have, particularly people of color, about what's going to happen if Republicans take over.
My goodness.
The reality is that we have a Supreme Court that says, all right, we're going to allow the states to decide what happens with regard to women's deciding what they do with their bodies. And you look at the states that are passing these draconian, anti-choice laws, anti-abortion laws. These are the same states that have not expanded Medicaid, And there's a consistency there. Because the reality is that if you are white and if you have a certain amount of money, you'll find a way. If your daughter has an issue, you'll find a way to deal with that problem.
Yes.
If you're black, you're poor, Hispanic, and poor in one of these states, you're not going to have that same capacity to deal with that issue, and they're okay with that. They're okay with it. That's real. They're okay with that. If this has a disproportionate negative impact on choice of women of color, they're okay with that, you know? They've made that determination that they're fine with that.
So I want to ask you about Shelby County versus Holder. Why was it not versus the Department of Justice?
Well, because anytime the Justice Department is sued, the Attorney General is the person who is named as representing the Justice
Does that
Department.
mean you can't really sue the Justice Department, you can only sue the Attorney General?
Yeah. If you sue the Justice Department, if you file something and says, I don't know, Smith versus United States Department of Justice, the courts will automatically put into that, it'll be whoever the Attorney General is.
That opened a floodgate. 1,700
polling places closed since the Shelby County decision in 2013, which really had a negative impact on the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. 1,700 polling places have been closed, disproportionately in places where people of color live. That's why you see these long lines. Interesting study that we talk about in the book. In Atlanta in 2020, same day, on the night of the election, 2020, if you were in a white part of Atlanta, you waited on average about 6 minutes to vote. If you were in Atlanta, same city, same election, same day, you waited 51 minutes. Now, you think about that. 6 minutes, 51 minutes, same election, same city. And you see that replicated all around the country. It's why when Georgia puts that bill into effect that says you can't give water or food to somebody waiting in line, you think, what is that all about? Well, if you create...
It's about an hour in line.
Well, but if you create long lines in places where people of color are waiting and make it more difficult to give them water if it's hot or whatever, food to people who are hungry, you hope that maybe 1-2% of those folks will maybe leave the line, not vote, and you take off 1 or 2% from that vote total of African Americans in Georgia. Warnock is not a senator right now. Ossoff would not be a senator right now. Joe Biden would not have won Georgia if you take that 1-2% away from the African American vote. And so these things that seem to be kind of hard to comprehend are pretty diabolical. They're willing to do a whole bunch of things, as we have seen throughout our history and as we talk about in the book, to keep black folks away from the polls, which is why when I hear young people, as you were saying before, and especially young black people say that my vote doesn't matter. No, your vote does matter. It matters a great deal, and people died so that you would have the right to cast a ballot.
So again, something that's not in the book. Give us a condensed version of the Department of Justice. How many employees, how many divisions, how are they prioritized on any given day, how many investigations are actually going on, how many lawsuits, how does the Department of Justice function?
Well, DOJ has got about 40,000 employees. It's the largest law firm in the world, about 7,000 lawyers. It also consists of the FBI, the ATF, the DEA.
They all report to DOJ?
They all report to DOJ. Some agencies report better than others. It's a worldwide organization. There are employees of the Justice Department around the world. It's a place that has billions of dollars in its budget. It's the only cabinet agency that's named for an ideal. It's the Department of Justice, not the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Housing, Urban Development. Justice. It's about an idea, a concept. When well run, it can be an extremely important, it's always important, but it can be a real force for good. When it is run in inappropriate ways, as Bill Barr did, it can be a place that does great harm to the nation, great harm to our democracy. What Donald Trump and Bill Barr did to the Justice Department was shameful. And so Merrick Garland, when he comes in, has to rebuild the morale of people in the department, make the department, again, the neutral place that it is, because the Department of Justice has huge amounts of power. Justice Department, prosecutors decide who are we going to indict, where are we going to use our enforcement powers? What statutes are we going to really focus on? And Barr and Trump thought that they would use the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents, which is inconsistent with what we say the Department of Justice is always supposed to be doing. Richard Nixon, tried the same thing, but not even to the degree that you saw Trump and Barr doing. So it's a special place. It is where I spent most of my professional life. It's a place that is going to be really important over the course of these next, I'd say, 15, 16 months, as maybe the most consequential decision that any attorney general has ever made is going to be before Merrick Garland, and that's to decide whether or not Donald Trump is going to be indicted. That's going to be the most big decision.
Is it possible for a former U.S. president to be incarcerated?
I think it's certainly possible, and I think that the reality is, and I've changed on this, because I did an interview with David Axelrod probably about 3 years ago now, and he said, what about the possibility of indicting Trump, former president? And I said, it would really split the country, and that you really have to think about that. The Nixon pardon, people say that was...
He was pardoned before he was indicted,
Before he was indicted. But the notion that Ford had was that he wanted to heal the nation.
If Trump isn't indicted, it's going to split this country.
Well, see, that's the point. That's exactly the point. If, in this instance, if you indict Donald Trump, it will certainly divide the nation. If you do not indict Donald Trump, that will certainly divide the nation. And so, the thing to do is just look at the facts, look at the law, and make the determination as to what ought to happen. And if we are truly going to say that no one is above the law, and if the facts show that Trump and his cronies violated the law, they have to be held accountable, they have to be indicted.
And wasn't that the issue with Richard Nixon? He broke the law.
He broke the law, but Ford...
And was forced to resign.
Forced to resign, but his crimes almost pale in comparison.
Oh, absolutely.
So
he was a choir boy compared to Trump.
And he was also, as much as he used the system, at some base level, Nixon respected the system in the sense that, and the Republican Party then respected the system. It was, after all,
Absolutely.
Republican senators who went to Nixon and told him, if this thing gets into the Senate, you're going to get convicted and you're going to get thrown out of office. Can you imagine this Republican Party telling Donald Trump
anything that
he's got to do anything other than what he wants to do? No.
The other thing that the Nixon administration never, I think, gets credit for in the black community is the influence that Perrin Mitchell had on Richard Nixon in terms of economic development. There were programs created that were put together by Perrin Mitchell. The Mitchell family of Baltimore, Maryland were very influential during the Nixon administration. And the SBA set-aside programs, numerous things that opened the doors for black economic development took place during that Nixon administration, and you're entirely correct, totally accurate. It was a different party. Where did all these mean-spirited, evil people come from? I mean, what produced it?
Well, I think at least
71 million idiots think that he should still be president. 71 million people think that he's okay as a president and he couldn't construct a sentence. Come on. You should at least be able to read, write, and count to be a president, I think.
Well, I think that a large part of the attraction of Trump is, again, it's about the retention of power, and the election of Barack Obama and what that meant. It's not only that, people had problems with Barack and maybe the way he conducted himself, carried himself, whatever, then the same thing, we don't like Eric Holder. What the big fear was what we represented. He was brought to office by a multiracial coalition that a lot of folks looked at and said, whoa, this is going to change this nation. We're going to lose power to this multiracial coalition. And so what we're going to do is oppose this president in any way that we can. We'll try to stymie his legislative agenda in any way that we can. And we're going to try to make sure that his supporters have a really difficult time trying to vote for him or people like him in the future. And that's what all of these laws that the Shelby County case allowed to be put in place. I mean, you look at Texas, for instance, probably the most difficult place in the country to vote. They say you got to have a photo ID in order to vote because they.
But your gun permit can get you.
Well, right. If you have a gun permit that says issued by the state of Texas and your picture's on it, you go to the polls, you say, all right, that's fine, you can vote. If you're a student with a state-issued photo ID that says you're a student at the University of Texas, that's not sufficient to allow you to vote. So what does that tell you about what the Republicans there are saying? All right, gun carriers, you guys get to vote. Students, we don't want you necessarily to vote. And that's, again, about the retention of power.
Again, my young people are disillusioned.
Well, disillusioned, here's the deal, all right? Things get hard, Things are hard, things are difficult. And as hard as things are now, they were a damn sight harder 50 years ago and 100 years before that.
That's true.
And so, if your photo ID doesn't work, or you have to have whatever kind of ID, get that ID and vote. But here's the deal.
But what about if we gave out in their book, get the book, please. Do not leave here tonight without ordering the book. We should pre-register young people when they're in high school. We should give out free ID. It would help TSA. It would help so many other branches of our daily life in America if we just gave IDs the same way you got to have a Social Security number. By a certain age, you should be required to have an ID, and it should be furnished by the government.
But I think we got to also, we can't buy into what it is that they say. You don't need photo ID to prove who you are. I mean,
yeah, but I'm just saying, it would help your daily life just to have it.
All right.
Everybody doesn't drive.
But they use photo ID as a way to keep people away from the polls.
Oh, yeah, no question.
And so my thing is, all right, you ought to prove that you're Eric Holder before you actually cast a ballot. But it doesn't mean you got to have a photo ID. I mean, there are any number, rent receipts, utility bills. There's a whole bunch of ways I can prove that I am who I claim to be in order to vote, as opposed to being as prescriptive as they are when they say you got to have this ID, this kind of ID. So they say driver's license is okay. Well, if you look at the statistics, the people least likely to have driver's license are black people and Hispanic folks, and don't think that they didn't think of that when they said that that was one of the ways in which you could do it. So, the bill that didn't get out of Congress in the last term said that, all right, yeah, you should have not photo ID, but some kind of identification with a whole range of things so that you could prove that you are who you claim to be. But the thing is, Republicans say you got to have all of these things to prevent voter fraud. And the Brennan Center has done a study that says you're more likely to get hit by lightning than to cast an in-person fraudulent ballot. So they're trying to solve for a problem that doesn't exist. They're using that as a cover to keep people away from the polls.
That's like in Virginia, Governor Youngkin had his inauguration on one day. The next day, he banned critical race theory teaching in Virginia schools. They don't teach it. He banned something that didn't even exist in the state of Virginia to make certain that it never existed. But why would you ban something that's not even there? But let me ask you this.
Wait, let's talk about Youngkin just real quick. What did his son do? Remember that one? Youngkin's son tried to vote twice.
Yes.
He's under the age of 18.
Yes.
So you talk about voter fraud and people trying to do things inappropriately. Now, so nothing happens to him, and I don't say you put him in jail or anything like that. You've got African Americans young woman in Texas.
Went to jail.
Goes to
accidentally made a mistake.
She's told she had served her time, was told that she could vote. She registers, casts a ballot, is prosecuted, gets sentenced to 5 years in jail.
5 years.
This is now in the process of being appealed. There's a guy in Pennsylvania, Trump supporter, his wife dies. He tries to cast a vote in her name through the mails. He gets probation. So, it's all about power, who you're trying to keep away from power, who you're trying to keep away from the polls, who you're trying to protect. And so that's the problem.
I want to tie it back into the film festival, and then we're going to then do Q&A since we're here at the film festival, and we thank them for allowing us to do this because this book is so important. There are some conspiracy theorists, like Dick Gregory was, who believe that Trump was a Hollywood creation, very much like, how many of you all remember the movie Wag the Dog? Well, you remember in Wag the Dog that the President of the United States had an affair with an intern in the Oval Office. The part that most people don't remember is that the movie came out 2 years before anyone ever heard the name Monica Lewinsky. And the whole movie is about how Hollywood, these producers in Hollywood, were hired to create war scenes and things that really didn't exist. How much responsibility is the creation of a Donald Trump? As I said, I wasn't trying to be funny. Can't talk, can't count, doesn't read, and yet he ends up being president of the United States. It's almost like the hypocrisy of we're the greatest democracy on the planet, but yet we don't allow our people to vote while we go into other countries to force it. How much of this is really influenced? Have we really been duped, 71 million people, into believing that this man was really presidential material? And the backlash is a result of when we got a legitimate president. Barack Obama showed what presidential material should be. That's what's causing all of this suppression, that because it flies in the face of this myth that has been created.
You know, I mean, I think we got to go a little deeper. You know, Trump tapped into something. You know, I mean, yeah, he's all the things that you said. He was singularly unqualified to be president of the United States. That's a given. But he got support because he tapped into something. You know, he tapped into something that's ugly in this nation, something that has been a part of this nation for far too long. He tapped into the fear that people have of a whole variety of things, of change, of people of color, about a nation that is going to be more brown than white after 2043. You know, he tapped into all of that stuff. You know, when he says, you know, I want to make America great again, he's looking back. You know, he says, I'll protect you from the future. You stick with me. And yeah, he knows nothing about history, can't give a great speech, but had the ability to mobilize the fear of the future and use that fear to get people to the polls to vote for him. But understand this, you know, our system allowed him to be president even though he didn't win the most popular votes, which is one of the things that I say we need to change in the book. We've got to get rid of the electoral college.
Got to get rid of the electoral college.
I mean, he lost this last election by 7 million votes, and if he'd gotten 45,000 votes more in 3 different states, he might still be president right now.
Right, and it wouldn't have mattered about the 7 million. Right. Got to do Q&A. Where are the questions? Who's got? Oh, no Q&A. Oh, they need for us to wrap now. I'm sorry, I apologize. Well, according to my Apple Watch, it says I got 10 more minutes. Okay, so does that mean we don't have 10 more minutes? It's 10 to, oh, okay, they want us to wrap. I apologize that I didn't get to the questions, okay?
Oh, we got to do a couple of questions, right?
Yeah, okay, that's not fair. All right, quick questions, okay? He's picking you in the hat. There you go.
Now, a question, but not a statement, a question.
You made a comment about young people, right?
I'll repeat the question.
What can we do to get more young black people to vote in this midterm election?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the formula for getting young black people to vote, the question was how can we get more young black people to vote in this midterm election? And I think the answer is the same as we would apply to everybody else, to make people understand that there's a direct connection between this election and their lives. Both in terms of, as I talked about, women, I don't understand how any woman could not be motivated to vote in this election, all right? So, but beyond that, how any black person could not be motivated to vote in this election, given what we have seen over the course of these last few years. But you've got to break it down and make people understand. When I talk about we have to stop gerrymandering, well, people say, well, it's gerrymandering. Well, if you care about a woman's right to choose, if you care about criminal justice reform, if you care about climate, if you care about a fair electoral system, all of these things are directly tied to voting. If you want economic opportunities, if you want the tax law is written in such a way that regular folks get breaks as opposed to simply billionaires. You've got to break all of this down for people so that they understand what's the impact of an election on their lives, not in the future, but right now.
One more quick question, right here.
Good morning, thank you for your, or good afternoon, thank you for your comments today.
Holler.
What can we do about social media and all of those bad sources of information that are feeding our young people and many of us older people too?
The question is, what is it we can do about social media that's giving us bad information, disinformation, has an impact on, on young people in our lives? I think I worry about too much regulation because who does the regulating? Donald Trump and his folks, what would they do with the griot, for instance? If they had that kind of power. But there needs to be some kind of regulation, given the fact that you see foreign powers, at a minimum, using Facebook in the way that they did, in the way that they continue to do, Twitter, and have an impact on our elections and on the way in which the American society constructs itself. So I think there's a role for government to play. And so I think, greater regulation, hearings in Washington to come up with ways in which you put parameters around what it is that happens in social media. But I think also we need to vote with our feet. To the extent that we are dissatisfied with what we're getting from a particular platform, we need to stop looking at that platform, stop using that platform. And that, I think, will have an impact. All right, so if we're out of time, can I just say one thing?
Yes.
All right, here's the deal. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But here's the deal. It doesn't bend on its own. It only bends when people like us, when people like each and every one of you put their hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And so the question all of us need to ask ourselves, read the book, that's fine, but ask yourself that question even today. What are you doing to bend that arc, to pull that arc towards justice? What are you doing? What I try to do is every Sunday kind of look back on the week that I've had and say, all right, what have I done? Am I satisfied with what I've done in the week that's passed? And think about what am I going to do in the week to come? And I think that's a little useful tool. So, Sunday evening when it's not too busy, just, off by yourself, what is it that I can do? It doesn't mean that you've got to run for office, though I would urge you, more of us, to do that. But it certainly means you need to vote. It means that you could do a whole variety of things to make this nation better. The power that we have as ordinary citizens is too often undervalued, devalued, and not understood. Dr. King, I'm sure, thought at some point, I'm not sure I can rip down this system of American apartheid. This book is filled with people who fought for an America that they never actually saw, but were able to imagine. And groups of people like us, didn't have just moments, they put together movements that changed this nation. We're not at the place yet where we need to be, but if we're ever going to get to that place where we need to be, it's up to this generation at this time to make sure that these changes occur. We have that capacity. We have that capacity, but it will only happen if each and every one of us. You can't wait, I say this all the time, the cavalry is not coming, We are the cavalry. We are the change. And so ask yourself, what are you doing to bend that arc and pull it towards justice?
May God bless you forever and may you live for 100 years. An incredible human being. God bless you. Thank you. And his wife Sharon and his daughter are here. Big round of applause. Thank you so much.